Hello and welcome to the Open Virtual Film Project. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to pull assets from the content browser to generate your first kitbash environment. Picking up where we left off with our ML tutorial version 1 open, we're going to leave our lookdev lighting sublevel and go into our kitbash sublevel. So double click, make sure it's blue, make sure it shows kitbash down here. You always want to pay attention to what sublevel you're adding things to. And now we're going to start exploring our scene. As I'm working in this environment, I also need to be able to move my viewport around. So I am doing that by holding right mouse button and using the W for forward, S for backward, A for left, and D for right keys. In addition, again while holding the right mouse button down, I can click Q, which drops me straight down, and push E, which pulls me straight up. I'm also controlling the speed of my camera. So you notice right now I'm moving at a nice reasonable pace. If I needed to move across an entire set, I'm going to use my mouse wheel and scroll my mouse wheel away from me, and that speeds up the camera motions. Or if I scroll the mouse wheel toward me, it slows them down. This setting is a persistent setting, so I don't need to keep scrolling. I can scroll to the value of speed that I want it to be, and then it will stay at that value. A skill that is useful to have in your pocket is when you need to move far away. You start by scrolling away from you, so you move nice and fast, and then as you approach your new area, you scroll toward yourself, and you're now at a good pace. If you need more camera speed options, clicking this little drop down will give you a camera speed slider. Turning it down to 1 makes you move super slow, and turning it up to 8 makes you move super fast, also affected by your mouse wheel. The first and simplest kitbash options we have are under the Place Actors Basic tab, where we can start adding cubes, spheres, cylinders, and cones, and planes to our environment. If you are in Unreal 5, your shapes are not found under the Basic tab, they are found under the Shapes tab, and you can find your cube, sphere, cylinder, cone, and plane here. These will be useful at any time if you need to white model something out. Anytime you need to add something to a scene, select the object, drag it out into the scene, and then you'll have a widget. This widget allows you to move it around. If you click W, you're in the Move tool. E is in the Rotation tool. Hover over and you can rotate your object. R is your Scale tool. Scale up and down. Scale along any of the various different axes. And then in the top right-hand corner, you'll have some further options. If I switch back to the Move tool, you'll see how this is moving along a globally defined red, green, and blue, or X, Y, and Z axis. If I want to change that, coming up into this top right-hand corner, I can click this Cycle Transform gizmo, and it'll transform from a world shape to an individual object shape. And now you see that cube's up axis is now up. Same thing goes for rotation. You can rotate around the object's origin. The next section talks about surface snapping. So if I were to grab an object, grab the center pivot of that object, so I can have the Z direction, the X direction, the Z and X direction, similarly with the Y direction. I also have a free move pivot, which is in the very corner of that circle. If I hold on to this, some fun things are happening. This is as a result of this surface snapping function. So if I turn it on, move my object around, it is snapping to the surface. It is only snapping from that pivot though. And you'll notice that as I move it around, it is snapping itself to the various different angles on the surface. I can turn that snapping off by clicking this Rotate to Surface Normal, and now it'll stay upright. If I choose this surface offset, it'll offset it away from the surface. So this is a useful feature if you're adding detail objects. I don't end up using it very often. I generally just tend to snap objects together. Similar to the surface snapping feature, if you hit the End key on your keyboard, it will jump down to the nearest collision surface. Can be useful if your environment has good collision, but it doesn't always work. The next section is this grid, which enables and disables snapping, and the snap sizes. So I'm going to set this to a value of 50, and you see it is moving in increments. This will be super useful when we start building an environment that is set up on a grid. A rotation snap feature, turn it on and off, and you see it is snapping 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees. If I turn it off, it is freely transforming between any of those. The last one is scale snapping. You'll see it is moving up in locked increments. If I turn it off, it will smoothly scale between different variations. This is super useful to have set as 1, and then if I turn on snapping, I can flip it around and keep the scale. So if I needed to mirror an object, I could use the scale snapping set to 1 and really quickly go pop pop, and it's mirrored. Easiest to see on this cone. If I have my scale snapping to 1, now that we can move around the scene and pull objects into our scene, we're going to start working on our kitbash environment. To do that, we need the content browser. Inside of Unreal 4, it is always up by default. If it's not visible, go into Window, Content Browser 1. If you are using Unreal 5, if you hold down Control and hit spacebar, it will open up your content browser, and from there you can grab the assets that you need. Back inside of Unreal 4 again, inside of this content browser, you'll see it is very similar to Explorer or Finder, where you have a bunch of different folders. And if I click in this top left-hand corner of my content browser, there is a Sources panel, which gives me a tree of folders. Inside of Unreal 5, the tree is always visible. And from here, I can navigate to the folder where my assets were imported. In this case, I'm going to start with the Classic Mansion set that I downloaded. If I wanted to take a peek at the assets that I downloaded, I could pop into Maps. There's a demonstration and an overview map. However, I'm more interested in starting to build my room from scratch, so I'm going to grab this Meshes folder. Inside of here, there's a bunch of different things, and I can see a preview of each and every one of the objects. I can also search my folder for different objects, so I'm going to search for floor. Come across a floor 200 by 200, 400 by 200, 400 by 400. I'm going to grab this 400 by 400 floor and make sure my position grid snap value is on. From experience with the Classic Mansion, I know a grid of 100 is going to be super useful for me moving forward. So if I grab my floor, drag and drop it into the scene, I now have my object. I'm going to add a couple more things. I'm going to grab a wall, drag it into the scene, a wall with a door, drag it into the scene, and a ceiling tile. So now I can start arranging my objects, change my grid value back down to 50 so I can get my ceiling to line up where it needs to be. And I'm going to flip around this wall. So now I have a little hallway section that I can start to play with. My goal for this first scene is to create a nice long hallway that I can look down. Very similar to something like a Scooby-Doo hallway, where people are opening doors on one side, running across the hallway, and opening a door further in the room, and running across the hallway there. I want to create a section where I've got floor with a door on two sides. To do that, I'm going to duplicate my first asset. Copying assets can happen with Control and W, which creates a duplicate of your object. Or alternatively, if I select something, Control C, Control V, and now I have two of it. Or if I hold down the Alt key and move the object, it will create a second version. Additionally, as I'm moving objects, if I hold down the Shift key, it will move me with the object. I've got my two walls on my floor. I want some doors. So I'm going to search through my section of kitbash assets and grab a door and stick it in the frame. Right now I'm running into another grid issue. I'm also very dark. I can solve the darkness problem a few different ways. If I grab my skylight, come into the Details panel. Again, if my Details panel is missing, Window, Details, Details 1, and move it wherever it needs to be. Grab my skylight in the details. I can bump the intensity. Or if I'm doing something quick, I can come into this Lit section, turn off game settings, and then play with this value until I get an exposure that I want. Something to consider is that when you're doing lighting work or rendering, this value needs to be set back to game settings, otherwise you'll get unanticipated errors. This value also does not transfer between computers, so if you are working with a team of people, you want to make sure your skylight, directional light, post-process, all of your lighting is set up so that it looks good with game settings on, and not rely on this exposure offset. It's good for a pinch though. Grab it and pull across. So now I have a hallway section with a door on either side, a floor, and a ceiling. And now I want to start duplicating this. So I'm going to go into my grid settings, set it back to 100, and hold down Alt with all of those objects selected. And I can shift all of those objects, create multiple copies at the same time, and my hallway is starting to take shape. As I'm working, this is a good example of a modification to my moving workflow. I'm working down here, and I want to set a temporary pivot point to work from in this corner here. If I hold down the Alt key and click in the middle mouse button, it will set a temporary pivot underneath my mouse, and then I can Alt move from there. And if I hold down Shift, it will follow my Alt move. Also, since I am using the same set of objects over and over again, if I make a selection, right click, there is a group function. So if I group, now if I click off it, click on, you see all of these objects are grouped together. And if I copy and move them, there's now 2 groups. A super useful function if you're creating something repetitive like this. So from there, I could go through, place all of my walls, make my hallway. At the end of the hallway, I would go through and create a bit of a return, so I don't see out of the hallway, and place whatever I need. One of the advantages to how this Git bash is set up, and something you can take advantage of if you have a similar setup or create a similar setup in the assets that you bring in, is the concept of modularity. So I'm going to make a few selections. I want the ceiling tiles, and I don't like how the ceiling tiles look in this room right now, so I'm going to change them out for something else. So when I select this ceiling tile, I'm running into the shoe where this object is grouped. I can ungroup it by right-clicking, groups, ungroup, or I can temporarily ungroup it and have the ability to regroup it later by clicking unlock. So if I unlock, I can select the bits inside, but only in that group. And if I come back to group, lock, it's back. So I'm going to select everything, groups, ungroup, so I can select just the ceiling and show you one of the advantages of modularity. So inside of the scene, there are 2 ceilings. There's this ceiling A and ceiling F. I'm going to choose ceiling F instead of ceiling A, and I can swap them out because of how they're set up. They have the pivot point in the exact same place. They're the exact same size. If you are creating assets for a scene and you want to be able to do this, you have to do both of those options. However, I have it set up. I'm going to grab this ceiling here, drag and drop it into the static mesh section here, and you see my ceiling is now swapped out for a different ceiling. Much better. From here I'm going to spend some time detailing out my scene, and I'll join you in the next video with a bunch of stuff added to the scene. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching.